Hi there, my name's James Whistler from Acid Yellow. I'm an Iron Speed MVP, and this video is designed to show you some of the structure of the IDE associated with Iron Speed Designer to give us an idea of its features and how best to use it. So let's take a look at the Iron Speed Designer product when we go into the edit mode and start looking at the structure of the design environment and what we can achieve. Iron Speed Designer generates N-tier applications for us, and on the left hand side we can see the Application Explorer here. Within the Application Explorer we have a tree view structure which, broadly speaking, reflects the structure of our generated application. If I collapse the top layer there, at the bottom of that tree view we have a database node. Above that we have the base classes. Above that we have stored procedures, but then we really get into the layers of the application itself. We have the data access layer, above that the business layer, and the very top level the presentation layer, which is where your rendered ASPX pages will be built. We'll come back to the Application Explorer in just a moment. Before we do that, let's have a look in the middle of the screen at what is known as the Quick Layout Editor. The Quick Layout Editor is a cell-based, almost spreadsheet-like editing environment, very similar to Microsoft Excel. Above this we have a breadcrumb which effectively shows us which section of the page content we are looking at. So on this particular page, which is the Show Categories Table ASPX page within the Southwind example, at the very top we have the master page that we are using to build our page upon. Within there we have the Show Categories Table page itself as applied to the master page, and then within that we're within the Categories Table control, the Categories panel, and we're looking at the Categories fields within that panel. To the right of the breadcrumb I also have a tree view structure with a drop down button which I can click, and here again I can show you the full hierarchical structure of the page, and this enables me to very quickly navigate from one area of the page content to another. You can see if I wanted to go and edit the categories panel header, for example, I can click straight into there, and this shows me that within the categories panel header we have a table control title region which I can click into, and here we have the categories title for the page. By right clicking on that and looking at the properties, I can go through here and see that Iron Speed will be displaying me the categories label. I would be free to change that to any kind of text that I'd like. I'll call it James's Categories. And of course I can then again use this hierarchical view to navigate to any other section, back to the fields for example. In addition to that, I could use the breadcrumb to navigate in exactly the same way. So for example, I could pull this down underneath the categories table control, and that would show me the two panel sections within there, which are the panel header and the categories panel, exactly as is reflected here. If I were to go to categories table panel, underneath there I have two nodes, the categories panel header and the categories panel. So I have multiple methods of navigating to the same screen content. You are free clearly to use whichever you find most useful to you. Because I'm looking at the categories fields here, I can also click this minus sign to zoom back out and effectively zoom up that hierarchical page structure. So from categories fields, if I were to click the zoom out, I'm going to click back, or zoom back rather, to the categories panel. If I click that, you can see how I can zoom back out all the way out of the page. I can't zoom again here. To do so would take me from this ASPX page that I'm looking at out to the master page definition that the page uses. But of course I can click in, and depending on where I wanted to go I can select it, the area I'm interested in on the screen within the Quick Layout Editor, and click zoom to take me through to that. In addition, I can double click those links to take me through. As you can see, there are numerous ways of navigating around the screen content, and the breadcrumb, together with this hierarchical drop-down control on the right, makes it very easy when you have complex pages with multiple tables and panels to find the content that you're looking for. Underneath the quick layout editor in the middle here, we have another section. The first of these on the left, shown it with the pink node, is the cell editor. This is a very simple WYSIWYG editor which shows us the content of any of the selected cells above it in the quick layout editor. So for example, I can click around the different cells within the layout editor and I can see what content will be displayed when that page is generated and rendered. I'm then free to insert any of my own text within there, so I could put James's example here, for example, and I could select that. I can then make it bold, and as you'll see, as I do so, Iron Speed Designer, rather than actually presenting me with the WYSIWYG version of that text, it's introduced tags within the HTML to achieve the effect that I'm after. So if I then make that italic, I could change the font size to 12 point, for example. Iron Speed will do all of that HTML work for me. I don't need to actually integrate and type in those tags. I can just simply go through and use the editor, similar to Word or a similar word processing product, to enable me to do that. In addition, if I had a very large amount of content in any of the cells, I can zoom that up to the top there very easily with this control to maximize and restore it so that I can see what I'm looking at in more detail. I can also apply borders or background colors to that cell, so I could apply, for example, a 2-pixel border all the way around there, and you can see here, I don't think I can highlight that text for you unfortunately, but above this section which I have highlighted, we have the class and then we have the style that that cell will use, and you can see that we've introduced here a 2-pixel border on all 4 sides, and it's solid. It's a very simple way of editing and playing with our cell content. Similarly, one of the pleasures of the quick layout editor is our ability to select multiple cells simply by selecting the first and holding down the shift button as we move across, and then I could apply a simple border to all of that. Similarly, I could change items such as the background color or the fonts simply by doing that across multiple cells at the same time. To the right of the pink cell editor tab down here, I've got a yellow tab showing me the word set. This is the code tab for the area of the screen which I've selected. There is a separate code tab video which can run you through in dramatically more detail what the code tabs are and how to use them. All I'm going to really say at this stage is that the set method is a commonly used or commonly overridden method of those fields and effectively binds the data values taken from the database to the literals which are displayed. By simply clicking on that, we could go in and introduce code overrides into it. I won't show you any more about that. If you want to have a look at that, there is a separate code tabs video which can run you through it in more detail. So just quickly before we do go and look at the application explorer in some more detail, to the right of the quick layout editor over here you will see the toolbox. The toolbox in Iron Speed Designer is now context sensitive. What do I mean by that? Effectively I mean that the contents available to us within that toolbox will change depending on what cell we have selected within the quick layout editor. In this instance, I'm looking at the Show Categories table page, and as a consequence, I've got at the top layer here within the toolbox, the top tab is Fields. So these are the fields which Iron Speed is aware exist within the Categories table, and as a result, I can drag and drop any of those directly onto my screen. So for example, let's suggest here that although the Category ID field, which is the unique key on this table, is not currently displayed within the table on the page, let's suggest that I did want to do that. How would I go about inserting that field? All I would need to do, assuming that I wanted it to be displayed to the left of the category name, is insert a new column to the left, just as you would do in Excel. Having done that, I've now got a new blank column, and I can simply go across here and drag and drop my category ID field across. There's my category ID. Now, in addition to the field content, I want a label above the field to be displayed within the table telling me what that is. So within the toolbox, again, underneath fields I have a labels tab, and that gives me all of the labels associated with the fields within the categories table. So I can grab the category ID and simply drop that across as well. It's literally that simple to add and include new fields. What else have I got available to me within the toolbox? I have panels. For example, I have blank panels with and without headers. I've got unrelated tables, and above that I've got related tables, which is products in this case. That's the scenario where Iron Speed is understanding from the schema that the products table and the categories table have a relationship, and as a consequence I can drag and drop entire panels of content relating to the products table straight into this screen. When I do that, let's drop one across, for example. The moment that I do that, Iron Speed will ask me to set the various generation options associated with that table control. It's very simple in this way to build pages and include related tables without having to go back and regenerate them. It's dramatically easier now with 6.2 than it has been with previous versions of Iron Speed. I'm not going to go ahead and do that at this stage. What I'd like to do now is talk to you about the Application Explorer and the structure of it. So over here on the left we have the Application Explorer, and as I mentioned briefly earlier, the layout of that tree view within the Application Explorer is intended to suggest and reflect the real structure of the different tiers within your generated application. At the very bottom then of there we have the databases node, and within there we can see the tables within our application and any views if we had built them. In these cases these views are shown in light grey. That simply means that although Iron Speed is aware of them and has seen them within the schema of the table, they're not currently included in our application. Above those we have the tables within the application, and for example let's look at the categories table. Here we are looking at the categories table now. If we go from right to left, on the very right hand side we have Iron Speed's understanding of the database schema. To the left of that we have what Iron Speed is actually going to use to generate and display of the various fields within the table. In this case we're looking at the category ID initially. So for example the label that is going to be used for the category ID, which is the unique key or the primary key on this table, is literally category ID. Let's say for example that I decided I had multiple pages with that field displayed, and I'd suddenly decided, well, I don't want that to be category ID, I'd like that to be category number. I can just change this now by going in here and changing the label text. I click OK, and that will now, when I rebuild my application, be reflected across the entire application. So every single page that uses the category ID column within that table will now use that new label text that I've selected there in the middle. It's a very powerful feature to be able to use that at the database level, and that's why the Application Explorer structure is useful to you, because it makes it clear that everything above this is going to be using the changes that you make at that level. Above that node we have the base classes level. The base classes are the code that is shipped with Iron Speed Designer to enable all of the various functions that are within your generated application to run. Talking about those is pretty much beyond the scope of an introduction to the integrated development environment, so I'm not really going to discuss them any further. Above that is the data access layer. This contains all of the various SQL definitions that Iron Speed uses to reference the tables within your application. Again, I won't go through how you would go about customizing those, but they are entirely available to you, and can be used to integrate something like auditing, for example, across your application. There are numerous examples of that actually available within the Iron Speed website. Above there we have the business layer. This is where we can include business logic associated with the various different tables within our application. But then above that, and this is the area that I'd really like to show you in some more detail, we have the presentation layer. This is where you do most of your work while you're working within Iron Speed Designer. So here we are within the presentation layer, and we've got a little brackets indicator up there to suggest that yes, we are looking at pages. This is the real content. It's what is rendered for your user. It's what they would see through a browser when they run your generated application. Now there are numerous different files within this node or within this folder. At the very bottom we have the web config. This is really the file which effectively defines how your application runs on your server. Again, it's pretty much outside the scope of this little introduction, but there it is, and there's an awful lot more detail available to you to learn how to amend that and configure it correctly for deploying your application onto a live server. Above there we have numerous folders which are associated with the tables within our application, but in addition to that we have some which are more generic. Let's have a look at the more generic ones because they may well be new to you, or you may not fully understand how they're used. One of them is the shared folder. Within here we have ASCX and ASPX pages which are shared across your application and are built by default by Iron Speed at generate and runtime. Above that, and of significant importance, is the menu panels folder and the master pages folder. These little green icons that are showing here on the show categories table page, for example, and on the menu, show us what Iron Speed is going to use by default. So for example, within the menu panels folder we could have a classic menu structure rather than a multi-level ASCX menu structure. Underneath here we have the sitemap associated with that menu, or the menu panels in the application. The green icon here is simply showing us that that will be used by default by all pages. In addition to that, above here within the master pages folders we have all the different master page definitions across our application, and most pages, or all pages rather, when they're generated will currently be using the vertical menu master page definition. And then the show above there, the show categories table ASPX page, which we looked at previously, is showing in green. That's the default start page when our application is built and at runtime. Above there we have the images folder, which contains all of the images which are associated with our application. There's nothing to stop you including your own images within that folder. And above there we have the header and footer folder. The header and footer folder contains the headers which are used throughout the application, but principally by our master pages. I'm not going to run through the master pages in enormous detail at this stage. It's pretty much outside the scope of this little video, but effectively there's nothing to stop us building our own master page definitions and including our own header and footer ASCX definitions and then bolting them into our master page content. So in addition to that, we've then got all of the different ASPX pages associated with our application. And in this case, if I just expand the node for the show categories table page, I'm just going to expand my toolbox slightly so you can see what we've got here. So we've got the show categories table ASPX page, we've got a Visual Basic file associated with it, and we've got two different reports, the PDF button click report and the Word report. Where is my code behind file then? My code behind is up here in the application code folder, and in there we have a whole separate node for all of the different folders that we had in the presentation layer. So within here I've now got the show categories table controls VB file, which is the code behind file for my show categories table page, and I can access my code directly by clicking through into there. Closing up the app code folder briefly, underneath there we have the application themes folder. When Iron Speed Designer version 6.2 builds your application, it creates this folder for you, and in there it copies in the definitions, or the CSS or custom style sheet definitions associated with the theme that you selected when you initially generated your application. The base style CSS file there contains all of the definitions within the entire application. That file should not be amended. If you wish to introduce overrides, you apply them within the style CSS. So in most cases it's simply the best way to actually go ahead and do that is to go into base styles, for example. I'll just run you through a quick example here. Copy the definition of the class that you want to change and paste it straight into the style sheet. For example, I can now change the color associated there, and that will now override the value of it in the base styles. I hope this video has shown you a little bit about the integrated development environment within Iron Speed Designer, and you've got a bit of a feel for the structure of the environment, and hopefully will be able to go ahead and expand your knowledge of the product. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.